Okay, we are now live streaming.
Okay, great. I'd like to call the Amity Board of Ed Communications Committee meeting to order at 5:37 p.m. The second item on the agenda is approval of minutes from our June 13th, 2023, which I couldn't believe when I saw the 2023 meeting. Any discussion on the minutes for those who were in attendance?
Well, and to be fair, I believe Donna is potentially the only existing member who would have been in attendance at that meeting. And I can't even remember if she was there. But either way, we may still need to have somebody make motions to approve the minutes.
I can't remember if I was there either, Jen, because it was granted June of 2023.
You were there. You were
okay,
there.
Okay, then I say yes, we approve it.
Okay.
Let's approve it. I'm sorry.
Do we need a second to approve it?
No, we don't need a second, but we would just need to call the vote. So Donna?
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Oladele?
Yes.
Miss Bradley?
Abstain.
Miss Lombardi?
Abstain.
And Mr. McDonough? Mr. McDonough, you're still on mute for right now, so I will take that. There you are.
How about now? If you
You're
can hear me,
now.
abstain.
Okay, thank you. All right, the motion passes 2-0.
Okay, great. Do we have any public comment?
We did not receive any requests for public comment tonight.
Okay. So the fourth item on the agenda is discussion of committee purpose and goals. So I thought we could spend a little time talking about how this committee came to be. So we thought of, and not we, but I think primarily our former board member, Jennifer Turner, had this idea of forming a committee or creating a space where we could have dialogue with community members. And the impetus for that was to, was for us to sort of start to develop greater trust with the community. And since during board meetings, we cannot respond to public comment, we would provide a forum that there could be sort of bi-directional exchange and folks could ask questions real time and get answers real time. So that was the original goal of the committee. We also, at the beginning of this committee, spent some time thinking about ways that we could communicate all the great things that are happening within our school district. But we sort of abandoned that because Paul has had a sort of write-up that he would send after board meetings that address some of the questions or statements that came up during public comment. And so since then, we've sort of been solely focused on, organizing and planning for these community forums. We don't have to sort of end there. There's some other things that we can think about doing, like, we can think about other ways that this committee can be helpful in, creating opportunities for us to communicate with our community members in ways that, again, will help sort of proper information exchange and to build trust within our community. So any sort of thoughts or questions?
Kathy has a question.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
First of all, and maybe I should know this, who gets Paul's letter?
Everybody does. So
who is everybody?
So we will send it out to, we have a list of news media outlets. So we send it out to them. They have the option of what to publish and how much. So typically the Orange and Woodbridge Town News will publish it in its entirety. Generally, Milford Orange Times will publish in its entirety, although I think they sometimes have to edit for space. New Haven Register never publishes it at all. And then I'm trying to think I think there's a couple. I send it to the first selectmen, I've just started doing that so that they can incorporate it into their newsletters that they send out. But again, I have a feeling they may have to edit a little bit because it's long. And then when we have the staff available, we convert it into an electronic newsletter, which is a listserv. And so people who subscribe to it are able to get it delivered electronically.
Jen, how about parents like across the district? I thought we got Paul's letter as well.
So we did it as a listserv because we walk this delicate line of parents who complain that we communicate too much and the emails just clog up their inbox and then they don't read anything versus the people who want to have the emails. And so we figured that if we did it that way, the people who were interested would subscribe to it and then they would be able to receive it. And then the individuals who feel like we're clogging up their inboxes wouldn't have to have another email coming from us.
So one idea that we can sort of consider is, as we think about the district website, is there room to have Paul's letter sort of, how you can go and like access like old board meetings and minutes?
If I had staff who could manage the website, you betcha. Again, it's one of those ideas that I wholeheartedly agree. I just don't. Getting somebody to redevelop a whole new section where it's going to go and make it so that it's prominent and not just buried in something else is part of the challenge. But yeah.
Okay.
I think the other foundation of the committee, and it actually sort of stems even a little further back. The community forums certainly were an idea that grew out of Bethany because the Bethany School District does those regularly and has for a while. So that definitely came from Bethany. But prior to that, we had some board members, primarily Mr. Brow and Miss Eichler, who would just make plans and like hang out at a Starbucks on a Saturday morning just to talk to people. And they made sure they represented both parties. They were there to talk to the Orange people. It was that informal exchange, that back and forth that we can't have at a board meeting where we're conducting the business of the board, that it seemed people were craving. And that was the intent of this committee. Other ideas that we've had at one point, there was a deliberate effort made that we would have board members attend PTSO meetings at the schools, because again, it's an opportunity where board members can interact with parents and interested families and answer questions. And, I think just it became a challenge getting individuals to have the time to get to those meetings. We have sort of those opportunities for that I would say more dialogue type of conversation. It's just a matter of how we seize it and take advantage of it.
I thought we weren't supposed to comment to the board, to the public.
So you can't comment representing the board. So you couldn't necessarily go out and say, for example, well, the board is going to approve a 3% budget, because then you're representing the whole board. But you can go out and say something like, well, we had a really good dialogue on Monday night between the AFC and the Board of Education and had a chance to ask a lot of questions about the budget and get answers. By the way, if you want to see them, there's a document online. It's more like you can sort of advertise everything that the board does. The other important part is taking questions back, because a lot of times people will have questions and then right at the board meetings, they ask us questions, they don't get answers. Paul will oftentimes try to answer those, but again, it's a much more informal process where literally you can write down a question and give somebody an answer.
Jen, you reminded me that, yes, this all goes back to the referendum time last year, when there was a great need to like just answer questions and make yourself available to folks within the community who had questions about sort of why budget wasn't passing. And so yeah, thank you for that. So yeah, but for now, again, we're focused on. Yeah, go ahead, Dana.
I only attended one of the forums. So how many have you guys already had?
We had two. So we started to build the idea last spring. Last spring's forum topic was just academics. So it was pretty broad, and it actually, I think, because it was a broader topic, generated a wider variety of questions and probably a higher level of interest. Obviously, I think a good number of you were at the forum in this October, and we brought up the social emotional learning in part because it was actually somebody requested it at the first forum. Could you please do a topic on that? So we said sure, and it's relevant and it comes up a lot. But I think it was a little bit more of a narrow concept. So even though I think we shared a lot of good information and answered a lot of questions, because it wasn't quite the umbrella that the other one was, it didn't necessarily generate the same type of questions that we got.
Yeah, the one I attended, I thought it was so well put together. I think that it was very informative from the parent. So now taking myself out of the board member seat, from a parent's point of view, it was so informative. And I think the forums are great. And I think whatever topics that come up that seem to be a topic of interest, for two reasons, they're more intimate. The live streaming, it's intimidating, and I felt more like we were together like I felt like we could have been at Starbucks talking about this stuff. It was less intimidating. So I really think that there's probably, and I also think, because I talked up the social emotional forum to a lot of people, and everybody who don't read the Amity happenings, I don't know why people don't read them, but they don't, and they missed it, and they were devastated that they missed it. And when I was telling them how great it was and how we were able to actually have the dialogue, I think once people realize what they are about and how good they are and how effective they are, I think they will really take off. That's coming from the parent side of me. I just think I think they're great. And that was one of the things that why I wanted to be on the committee. So I just think that the more we can make people understand what they're about, how they run, and then get people to go to see how it is, I think they would be amazing.
I think you're right, Dana. I think the perception is we're just going to get a presentation like we get in the board, right? That's the perception. But the reality is it's much more informal. There is that interchange. You can ask questions, the people can respond. It's much more a communal event, right? And I think people's perception is it's just a download from the board.
Yeah, no, I mean, Dana, I'm glad that you felt that it was like sort of a more intimate environment and sort of warmer, because that was our intent. So that's great to hear that. And the good news is you'll have a role in making sure that happens for future forums. So, I mean, one thing I was thinking was, we talked about whether we should have it sort of recorded or have it broadcast, and just starting to plan these, we decided that we would just take it one step at a time, but that's certainly something we can think about and consider for future forums. Maybe not, May, or like maybe the one after that. So I think last year we decided, and Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, that we would have about 2 or 3 forums a year. I think we said 3.
2
forums per year. 2?
It was
So
always,
one in the spring?
One in the spring after the budget passed, because we wanted to really keep it separate from the budget, and not make it appear like it was somehow some kind of plug that we were using to get people to vote in favor of the budget. Plus we could run into some referendum laws. So we just said after the budget is done. And then one in the fall. That October time worked really well. I mean, I think that's the other thing that we're always sort of aware of. There's a lot that goes on in the school that draws our community members away from being able to participate in things. And so we're trying to find sort of that sweet spot where we know that most people would have that availability to attend. So, I think we can still have some flexibility with the fall date, because I don't know that we all were like, wow, that was perfect. But the May date seems to really work because, like I said, it's after the budget. It's like just close enough to the end of school year that people still care and are paying attention. Once we cross, anything after Memorial Day, it's kind of like the school year's over. So, the timing of it works out pretty well.
Yeah. If there are any other questions about sort of the purpose or goals or ideas for the committee itself, and obviously we'll have lots of other opportunity to brainstorm other ideas, or you can think about other things that may be within the purview of this committee.
Mike, I know you were sort of interjecting, and then I don't know if we answered your question or.
I had a very simple one. Paul's letter. Do we get CC'd on that? Because I don't think I've ever received one. But how often do you do them?
Yeah, so typically we do them after each board meeting. I think I accidentally forgot to do one after the January board meeting, because when I went to look, I was like, oh, there's December and February. I just drafted. What we used to do was send you the link to the electronic version. So you could just click on it and see the electronic version. But unfortunately, the staff member who I usually have working on that has been out ill for a while. And so I don't really have somebody who can convert it yet. But I know I saw it on the Orange Town News yesterday when I was searching online. So it's available out there, and I can at least send you the link to that.
Okay. And this might sound like a strange question. Does anybody get to see the letter before Paul sends it out?
No.
Is there
so
vetting? It just
no.
on the chair?
So yeah, so we have actually a bylaw that says that the official people who communicate with the press or with the public are either the board chair or the superintendent. And actually for a while, we used to try to, part of the reason why we always had this committee on the Tuesday after the board meeting was that it would help us figure out what we wanted to include in Paul's letter. So that was usually our so we always had the meeting Tuesdays after board meetings. So then we could say, okay, these are the topics we should put into the letter. So while the communications committee had input on kind of the topics, it usually ended up being Paul and I who would write it. A lot of the information comes from the superintendent's report. So sort of the good news stuff that goes into I just pull some of the items right out of the superintendent report that's in your board packet. And then Paul usually has an opening statement that kind of addresses something that came up at the board meeting or a hot topic that's sort of being chatted about in the community. It often includes what policies we just updated. And the other problem is we're always up against a publication deadline. So again, second Monday of the month is the board meeting. The second Tuesday of the month was communications, and pretty much the second Friday was the deadline for when I had to have the newsletter to the news outlets. Now that Orange Town News and Woodbridge Town News are both online and only online, we may have a little more flexibility with them, but that was kind of the cycle, again, because of publication deadlines.
Okay, no, my question was going to be following up, like how you were stating it as Paul's letter. Was it more from the board point of view and you weren't involved in it? Like, is Paul the only one that was writing it? Nobody was seeing it until it hit the papers. So as long as there's always a second person involved, it just seemed the way that you were versing it, it was Paul's letter, Paul did it, and I'm like, I've never seen Paul's letter. How does this work? Is it just something that Paul did? But so you're involved. There's vetting back and forth. It's not just Paul writing a letter that nobody else gets to see.
Yeah, actually, I usually start with a draft and send it out to him, and then he adds sort of his kind of board chair take onto it. And honestly, he tells me when I put too much in. Yeah, he's like, no, don't
It
leave
just
this out.
sounded
Get
weird. It
rid of
was
that.
Paul's letter, Paul doing this, and just as long as there's a second set of eyes on them,
Yep.
I don't really mind whose eyes they are, as long as there's always a second set.
Well, and I guess ultimately when it's published, it says
Okay.
news from the board chair. And again, just trying to sort of have the board have that front face with the community instead of it being the superintendent, because you're really the representatives for the community.
Yep. Nope.
So yeah.
I think I just wanted clarification on how it was sounding to me. So, and you answered exactly what. So I'm good.
Okay.
All right.
So Carol,
anything else?
Carol.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hey, sorry, it's Donna. At one time you talked about a newsletter for like Board's Corner. Did that get taken over with Paul's letter, or is that something that was still under consideration? Someone can remind me.
I think Paul's letter ended up serving its purpose. But I do think that at some point, what we have to really do is go and have a warehouse of those letters on the website, because then that becomes the corner where if somebody has questions about something that we wrote about a year ago, and it's like coming back up again, we can keep referring people back to there as another place of information.
Okay, so as you brought the website up, Jen, the position we were talking about last night during our meeting, would this position also have the responsibility of developing a said page that we were talking about for this? I mean, you said you have personnel who have been out, who usually convert this and make it available. And the next part of the question is, you know, when we update our policies, you know, whose responsibility is it to take care of that, just to make sure that our policies are in legal compliance?
It's nobody's. That's the problem. There is nobody in charge of the website.
So, but would the position that we talked about last night be the person
they would
who
be.
Yes.
Right.
So this is why I really believe that this position is imperative for multiple reasons. That, you know, things that if you have a staff member who's sick, who can't get to it, that this is a responsibility that this person would have. And it's one more way that the community sees the district, and keeping a robust, up-to-date website. So I actually support the position we talked about last night, staying in the budget. And I think that
we don't want to stray too close to the budget conversation, but
no, I don't want to get too close to the budget conversation. But as a committee, I think that we should talk about the value in this position and how it supports communication as a role, not just for the district and the board, but also a personnel within the district who has the responsibility. And there are legal types of consequences for policies, and being able just to maneuver around the website. So I just think that perhaps maybe we should talk about why it's important and what this position and the role that it fills, not, you know, within the budget, but within the just the entirety of this position.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, Donna. Like, so you're asking us to think about like how some of the ideas that we have for this committee, and thinking about how best to communicate with the larger community, and how this role can be really instrumental in helping us as a committee sort of execute some of these things, some of our ideas.
Well, yes, and then there was also and then there was also the conversation about, you know, what we brought up last night about the unleveling, which is, you know, I don't want to jump ahead of the agenda to talk about the next community forum topic, but getting that information out to where we're not, as board members, getting many questions around the strategic plan and the unleveling, where some parents actually felt a little blindsided and not in the loop. And this would also support that and help that. I mean, now we're having this conversation, you know, because of timing in the budget in May. And that, you know, we understand that, but I feel that there are, you know, I've heard from many concerned parents regarding this topic specifically.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna hold that for a sec, Donna, until we get to the forum topics. I do want to, if there are not any other questions right now, I do want to move on to number 5 on the agenda, the committee bylaw. So Jen and I met a couple weeks ago to talk about this committee. So this committee is technically an ad hoc committee. But I think, if I remember correctly, Jen, Paul was interested in exploring how this could be, like, move away from being an ad hoc committee to being a permanent committee. And you were going to look into bylaws about communication.
Yeah, so I'm a little behind on that, but I will. So a communications committee is actually not a typical board committee. Finance is typical, personnel is typical, communications is a little bit more unique. Not that other boards don't have it, but I just don't have like a vast array of places where I can pull some language from. But what we would really need to do is, as a communications committee, we would develop a bylaw that would establish our purpose and kind of the reason for having the communications committee and sort of the scope of our work. And then we would have to have that. So we would sort of write that bylaw, then we would bring the bylaw to policy, and then it would go through the policy process to get approved by the entire board. So what I will do between now and I'd say the next well, maybe up through like a little bit after May 11th or March 11th, when we have the next budget board meeting, I'll try to draft together a very simple bylaw that would be used to help establish the committee. In the meantime, what the members can do is, I suggest you go look at our bylaws and look at the language that forms the other committees, because you'll see that it's not like very detailed. It's a very broad, general umbrella view. Finance doesn't work because finance is unique and it's its own thing, but look at the language around the other sort of major committees: personnel, facilities, curriculum, and you'll have a sense of what a bylaw for a committee looks like. And then I can have a draft ready that I'll email out to people just so you can read it ahead of time before our next meeting.
Jen, just curious, is there a time limit on like a committee being ad hoc, or can you just
as long as an ad hoc committee can last until the chair disbands the ad hoc committee. Like, it's just it goes in perpetuity.
Okay. I guess what's the
can
go ahead.
I need to ask a question. So the purpose of this committee is to create more interactive communication, be more proactive with the community, correct?
Yes.
Do we do the same thing with the students?
What do you mean?
Yeah, explain a little bit more.
So do the students know what's on a very high level, what's going on in the school, right? In the middle school, right? If you're going to start wrestling. In the high school, if there's, you know, some new programs, some events, something going on. Do we communicate with the students on a broad level?
As the board, never. As administrators, yes, probably more from a principal level. And I think it kind of depends on what the topic is. So certainly, let's say if the board had approved a middle school wrestling program, then Mr. Goodwin would definitely be out there selling and advertising that we had a middle school wrestling program. Our kids are extremely aware of the library media renovation, and we'll have some input into that. But the topic like middle school on leveling, that's not, it's really an educational practice recommendation. So that's not something we necessarily have a conversation with the students about. I'm trying to think, portrait of the graduate.
Yeah, no, I
They're
was thinking about
constantly involved in.
like the media renovation, like the new things happening in the library, like things happening with audiovisual, like whatever it is that makes them feel great about the school. There's interesting things happening that may or may not be aware of. And I don't know, like you said, that may very well be happening. I knew we were talking about the public, and I didn't know if we cared to, if we cared for the students.
Kathy, I imagine that like student council, and I mean, I imagine they're like, ways that this information is communicated within schools. I imagine from like student council, I don't know, and like clubs, teachers, the principal, I don't know. The principal send out something at the end of each week that has like a list of like all the things happening. Every time. Go ahead.
So it's cared for.
It is cared for, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we can, and Jen, I don't know, I guess, what's the push for us to like move from being an ad hoc committee? Like, what's the benefit? Like, I don't know. I guess why and why now?
I don't know either necessarily. I think it's okay for us not to rush it. I think again, maybe the idea with the bylaw kind of helps put a frame around what we do so we don't overstep bounds. And that may be the reason for sort of more formalizing it. And I think the other thing too, as we sort of saw last night, like when it's not formal, there's a question as to whether or not we have the authority to do it or not. So even though, yes, we absolutely can have ad hoc committees and we have authority to do all kinds of things as an ad hoc committee, I think the formalization process kind of takes that argument out of, out of the wind out of those sails.
Okay, good point. All right.
Hey, Jen, can I ask you a question? Just because I think you're the longest and the most informed. Are you seeing a need for this to the public besides what we see on our side? Do you think like we need to go to a formal committee? Do we need to take, do we bring back, I can't think of his name right now, going to Starbucks on a Saturday morning? Was that productive? Do we need that? Like with the last board meeting, with the issues that were brought up, like, is it becoming more and more pertinent to have this committee?
So I think actually this committee's role would actually not be dealing with something like the February 12th board meeting. And that's because, and when it gets to that level, that's where I'm starting to dig in with PR specialists and carefully crafting messages. I think.
Well, let me rephrase it off of that. And I didn't mean it in that direction. Just the open communication from the board to the public, like, does it ease some of the stuff? Not necessarily that specific item that was on the February board meeting. But so, are you seeing, like, say, from 5 years ago, pre-COVID to now, there's more of a need for this? Do we step it up preemptively so that we're getting more information out there just to make your job, Hauser's job, and theoretically our job easier down the road? Is the atmosphere of everything changing, I guess?
I don't know that the atmosphere has. Yes, the atmosphere has changed in a way that people seem to pay more attention to board meetings now than they ever did 5 years ago. I mean, honestly, like if we had a public comment, it was like a shock. So there's definitely been a shift there. I kind of like Dana love the intimacy of those community forums because there is that back and forth that we can't get in a board meeting. And I think it all makes us much more human and much, I mean, again, when we're at a board meeting, we are doing the business of the board. So we're at work. Whereas the community forum feels much more like you are just sitting down and having a conversation. And I do think we have that need, maybe not because the community has a desperate number of questions, but just because I think we have to, it gives an appearance of being much more accessible than what I think is typically perceived. And I think they're very well received. The ultimate, I guess, challenge is that some of the conversations or the comments or observations that happen at the board meetings, I'm not sure that community forums are going to necessarily change any of that. So I think we have to go in with that sort of acceptance as well, that the community forum is really, it may not have the results that of changing people's minds. But
I think they're more required now because change is constant, right? And then once things start to change, people get uncomfortable. They think they didn't know it. They want to be able to ask questions. Some people can't come to a board meeting. Some people don't want to ask a question at a board meeting during public because it's televised. So I think that intimate forum is a great idea. I also think because the amount of change and because of social media, the misinformation that's out there, those forums are very helpful.
But I think it's also important to remember that. So Mike said something about being like proactive. So this committee was formed, if you remember how we started this conversation today. This was a reaction, right? We were actually reactive to, you know, sort of feelings of distrust within the community, feelings that, or thoughts that there was a lack of transparency. And so part of the formation of this committee was to address that, right? To create those intimate spaces, like not televised, where folks could come, ask questions, get answers, and, you know, administrators are there, board members are there, right? So that's it. So we're not actually, at least, we weren't being proactive. However, I think, you know, the forums have gone well, and the goal is for it to sort of rebuild trust, right, that our community has, and for our community to say, you know what, this is transparent. I have questions about this. Look, there are people here in this small setting outside of a board meeting. They can answer these questions, hard or not hard questions, right? And so that's the goal.
And I think we have talked about how lovely it would be if the community forum could be proactive. I think what we've all learned is that we never are very good at anticipating what is going to set off the firestorm. And so we'll think it's going to be one thing, and then it turns out to be something totally different. So that has been, I think, our challenge. And so I think to the best extent, we can continue to try to be proactive, but I think there's always going to be a reactive component to this meeting because, you know, we've said things like, yeah, this is what we think people are going to feel. And then it's something totally different. We're like, wow, we didn't even think that was going to become an issue.
Well, that's Jen, interesting, that's Carol. Oh, I was gonna say, Carol, it's interesting because I see it as filling a need, not being reactive. So it's filling a need that we need to communicate a little more, and people have questions and they really would like some answers. And I know I floated this one other time, and I don't know if there were any other. I mean, there is a need. There's a need. Other districts have a communications, you can call them a director, a manager, who has a cohesive message, has a communications plan, from the website to what's going on social media and grassroots and the communication. So it comes as if a consistent message with a communications plan, from the newsletters to the PR to fielding all of the PR. Now that Jen, that you mentioned that you have someone as a consultant for PR, they would fill that need, and they would work with with Jen and the other administrators. Well, so when I can't remember who was asking the question about, how is information communicated to the students and to parents and to the community. And even I think sometimes what's get lost is transitioning the sixth graders into the district as well.
Mm. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, so when I say reactive, like there was an issue, right, that caused us to think about like ways that we could improve communication. So that's what I sort of meant in saying that we're reactive.
Oh,
yes,
no, right, but it was reactive, but it was also filling
a
this
need. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
right. It's like anything, you fill a need because it's there.
Yeah. So I'd like to segue to talking a little about potential forum topics for May. So again, we have we plan to have 2 forums per year. The next one will be at the end of May. I should know, it's like May.
Like May 20th. Hang on.
20th?
Give me a second. It is May 20th.
Okay. So scheduled for May 20th. So I thought, it's never too early to start to brainstorm forum topic ideas. So yeah, I'd like to just open it up if folks have ideas for potential topic ideas. Again, we've had 2 so far. The first forum topic was academics, and the second was SEL. And Jen, I don't know if we had, or Donna, if you remember other topics. I know we've like brainstormed lots of different topic ideas. If there's some from last year that we sort of tabled or and prioritized academics and SEL over.
I don't know. I think I can go back and look at my notes, but I think to Jen's point, we don't know what is going to, I believe it was set off a firestorm. And perhaps I thought that maybe talking about the unleveling or deleveling, however we want to phrase it, in May was a little late, but I think maybe it would be very timely, especially if we can get into the 6th grade transitioning, because they're going to be affected. It's brand new, and especially for parents who have multiple children within the district, it's going to be different and new when they're registering for classes. I think I have a 6th grader, so I think we start registering in April. If I remember correctly, I have to go back through my email.
Yeah, it'll be probably earlier. The registration actually will probably open up this week for 7th grade. Selection of classes is a little bit later, but yeah, registration starting like within days.
Okay, so I should see something, and so I would like to maybe throw that out there as well. And I'm not sure, Jen, if you get through the PTOs or how we get to the 6th grade parents, or now that they're in the system. No, they're not in the system until they leave the elementary school, correct?
In terms of communication?
Yes.
Yeah, no, we did this last year for the academics, you'll remember. So yeah, we have lists, and I just sent it out to the superintendents and just asked them to have their principals share the information.
Okay. All right. So then I should see it. We get a weekly email from our principal, so we should see it, and I'll see what that looks like. So maybe Jen, what do you want to call it? Do you call it unleveling or deleveling? I've seen it.
I'm calling it unleveling right now. Okay. But yeah, that's the term we'll go with.
Okay, so that's what I was using, and someone used D, and so I wasn't sure how we were going to.
Certainly, one of the other topics that's come up, multiple requests, has been to have a forum around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes, that was one as well.
So that's been one of the topic requests. I'm trying to think. No, there's not really been a lot of other suggestions from the community per se. So
are there things? I'm sorry.
Dana.
Are there things coming up? Because as you guys are talking about this, I'm thinking of things that have set off fires in the last year. And are there things coming up that are going to impact the students in different ways? And the one thing I'll bring up, and again, I don't know that something like this would be sufficient for a forum. It might be too small, or maybe you'd have to put in a few things. But remember at that board meeting when everybody was going crazy about the new Hall Pass app?
Oh,
Like something like that, I thought of, where there was mentioning of it in like July. I think we got like an email about it, but who the heck read it other than me? And then I think it was mentioned in the community happenings, but again, I can't tell you, people tell me they don't read it. I don't know why I read it. But something like that, I would think, and you may say it's not big enough of a topic, and it might
No,
have to be
but
something.
that was the topic. We had no idea it would become such a big deal.
Right.
Because we
Right.
had a hall pass system already, and all we did was change to a different one. And we're like, whoa, why? I don't get this. But yeah, that was our exact example.
If there's anything coming down that's what I'm just thinking of. That's going to be new. I mean, I know everybody wants to talk about DEI, but aren't we all kind of sick of talking about DEI? Like that's every meeting. And I know they want to talk about it, and that's great. Let's have a forum on it. Maybe that'll fulfill the needs of everyone to hear everything and to see. But I think you guys are transparent about it at every meeting. So whatever, have a DEI one. But then is there anything else coming down the pike that might be a topic that would be maybe of interest? Maybe it's not going to set a fire off, but an interest.
Jen.
So
yeah, that's a good point, Dana.
I had two bigger suggestions. One could possibly be just having a community forum around the strategic plan. And the timing could be one of two. We could do it in the springtime, and then since the topic of like unleveling is in the strategic plan, since the topic of DEI is in the strategic plan, since the topic of school climate is in the strategic plan, or curriculum revisions, like all of these things that I think people have like sort of their individualized passions about, they're all in the strategic plan. So it would be really broad, but we could potentially answer and address a lot of questions. And Dana, to your point, the strategic plan outlines sort of visions for the next 2 years. So something that maybe is going to rattle feathers might sort of come up. It would help in the spring because my admin team and I will go and we'll, sort of close out what we accomplished this year and build out for a new year. So feedback from the community at that point could sort of help us guide that. The challenge is people would have to read the strategic plan.
I was going to say, that's exactly what I was going to say, but not the entire strategic plan. I think that would be too overwhelming for people. And the reality is like, people aren't going to read it. So I think we can use the forum as a space where people can learn about what's in the strategic plan related to specific topics. So if unleveling is one, we can say, we can open up the forum to say, or advertise that, we'll address topics like the next two will. And this is a great way for us to be proactive in communicating. We're going to like address topics within the strategic plan. And here's an opportunity, right, to come and like talk about what's written in the strategic plan regarding, I don't know, DEI, unleveling, whatever. But we can take each, and maybe we can pair them. I just don't think the like whole thing, but maybe we have two things within the strategic plan within one forum, depending on sort of how broad, how much information there is about.
Certainly.
Let me just, I'm sorry, I don't mean to overtalk you, but I think the idea of picking out like 1 or 2 items or 3 items in the strategic plan, but for people to understand, we do have a vision and a plan of where we're going, right? Yeah. Which people are making decisions, right? Am I going to go to Hopkins? Am I going to go to Amity? I'm going to go to, right? And this strategic plan says we have a vision of where we're taking this school. And I think that's that alone is a great message.
Yeah. Yep.
And
I like that, Kathy.
A strategic plan, goal 1 and goal 3 are the ones that impact kids. Goal 2, which is around resources, it's really more about teachers and staff. So you could literally go into the first and third goal, and probably, again, as a committee, if you look at it, you'll see the things that you think are going to be topics. And the messaging that I send out is easy, because I can just say, we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z. If you have questions about X, Y, and Z, ask your questions here. So I think if we pick what those topics are, we could definitely make it broad enough to cover concerns, but narrow enough that we're not. Because again, the other thing I have to bring up a panel of staff who can answer some of those questions. So it has to have a little bit of a container on it, or else I don't know who to have up there who can adequately answer the questions. The other topic, and again, this might be the forward-thinking topic, and I don't know that it's burning or pressing on people's heads yet, other than educators, is the conversation around AI, which is all we talk about in our classrooms right now. And I think it would be fascinating for parents to start to hear about it and its intersection with what kids are and aren't going to do, both in school and then in their future. But that one may take a little more work on my end. But I think
so Jen,
yeah.
I love that idea too. I was just going to ask, has the administration formed boundaries around AI use, and sort of, do you have an approach or something you share? Like, what are the boundaries? What are the guardrails for the?
I mean, we're still learning it. So right now we only use generative platforms that have the agreement with the Connecticut, Internet and Child FERPA protection apps. So we can't necessarily, well, in theory, we can't use something like ChatGPT because it doesn't have any of those agreements. So we encourage our students, at least through the school, to use some very specific generative technologies. We're still teaching teachers how to use them. We did, you'll remember, policy just updated the policy, and we left the language very, very vague because we don't know really what it means. And I think the conversation we're having right now with staff is not if you teach it and if you use it, but what is the purpose of your task? And then to what degree does AI help you? And at what point does AI become doing the work for you instead, or for the kid instead? And so, yeah, we're literally figuring it out, kind of like everybody else. But I think that's the reactions, if the reactions of the staff to it are anything like the reactions to our parents are going to be, it's going to be all over the place, from this is the coolest thing and it's going to change the world, to I think everybody needs a pencil and a piece of paper, because if they don't, nobody's going to think for themselves anymore. So, I mean, I think it would be a really interesting conversation to have with our community.
I think, yes, I agree. I mean, it's going to be an interesting tool, and watch it develop over time. So if do we think that the unleveling is perhaps a good May topic, and maybe artificial intelligence a good fall topic?
I think the unleveling should fit into a bigger umbrella. So if it's part of a strategic plan discussion, but I think we should also probably reach out to other board members, because there's a small group of us here,
right,
trying to sort of guess what the community is talking about. So I think when Carol and I met, she talked about just sending an email to all of the board members and saying, if you have ideas for community forum topics, email her. And then we'll be able to sort of pull from what other people think to decide what fits within that strategic plan kind of umbrella, so that we may maybe focus on 3 to 4 or 2 to 3 items. I think 3 is probably good.
Yeah, and so the idea is that the idea wasn't for us to sort of decide tonight. It was just for us to start to think about potential topics. I need to reach out to the entire board to see if other folks have ideas for forum topics, and then I think starting in March we'll really start to sort of nail down. I think we need to pick a topic probably next month, during next month's meeting, and then sort of you know, put the logistics together and think about, you know, advertising and other things, and prep for the forum in May. It might seem far away, but it'll be here. May will be here before we know it. Well, it's 6:32. We're about 2 minutes over. Any pressing last comments before we adjourn?
So I would just make a recommendation that we sort of reestablish kind of that more consistent meeting. So March 12th would be our next communications committee meeting. And we've had the practice of doing them virtually because we've all just come typically off of a board meeting the night before. And so if everybody's okay with that, March 12th at 5:30 would be the next meeting. And I'll work with Carol to put together an agenda, but it would be pretty much probably trying to shore up the topic of the community forum, review a draft of a potential bylaw, and then kind of discuss anything that we think should be included in the monthly chair newsletter report.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
The fog has lifted.
Good.
And does 5:30 work for everyone?
Dana, what about you? I know 5:30 is pressing.
Yeah, I mean, I might be in my car driving home tonight. I was lucky enough to get out early, but
Say she was the first one on board tonight.
Yeah.
If I have to be in the car driving home, then I'm in the car driving home. Or I'll sign on. I usually leave work between 4:30 and 5, and it just depends on how awful that traffic is on 34.
Yeah. No. Okay. All right. Well, let's for now, we'll stick with 5:30 to 6:30. And then, you know, we can always sort of revisit if it doesn't work. Okay, I think that sounds good, Jen. And I'll connect with you ahead of the next meeting to map out the agenda for our next meeting. And then otherwise, you'll see an email from me, well, to the whole board, rest of the board, just asking about sort of ideas for May forum topics.
Quick question, Carol.
Make sure, Carol, when you send it, you do it as a BCC, so that way they only reply back to you.
Quick question.
So it's not a meeting. Yeah.
I know we're going to look at the bylaws from the other committees. Are we supposed to work on bylaws? Who's doing the bylaws?
I'll do a draft, but if you just look at
Perfect.
the other ones just to kind of see what how the flavor of it runs, then you'll sort of get a sense of how I draft up the communications draft.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. So
thank you, everybody.
Meeting adjourned
Thank
at
you.
6:35. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.